Hey guys, so I'm Jonathan. I'm the founder and CEO of Phi, and I'm going to talk about this new energy cellular standard, catalyst to wearable adoptions, and most importantly, the real-world application into saving puppies. So that's a chart I like to look at. That's something I came up with, which is basically the relation between recharge cycle and value for the consumer. In the consumer space, we have a lot of devices that keep emerging, keep coming and being pushed to us, and some get adopted and some get rejected. And I want to think that battery life plays a big role into this. So like when you think about value, like you can ask for consumers to actually recharge their device very frequently if you provide a lot of value to them. So like a good example of that is your phone, right? You're going to recharge your phone every day, but the value is so high that you're actually going to do it and continue to adopt that product. If you look at other product categories, you can think of like Bluetooth headsets, right? They've been here for a while, like during all the 90s they were existing, and like the value for this use case is pretty clear to us. It's pretty convenient to have like a wireless headphones, but not that enough that we're going to recharge it every 2 or 3 days. So Apple did something pretty cool. They just shifted this, and they designed the case. And all of a sudden, like there are millions and millions of headsets out there. Does this make sense to everyone? So we kind of use this framework in like trying to understand how adoption happens in this type of environment. What's really cool also is that if you look at other product categories, like smartwatches, for example, they were there for a while, and the use case for the smartwatches didn't really change. But like, if you use your smartwatch for just reading emails or tracking different things, you're gonna like you're gonna churn out of it pretty fast. What we realized is that the people who really adopt smartwatches pretty heavily are people who use it for like athletic and leisure kind of things. And so the use case can be different for this different type of product. And if the value is different, then the adoption can change at the same recharge cycle. So all of this is really to show how like critical battery life is to like this type of wearable and any kind of like consumer devices adoption. And there are a bunch of cellular technologies and other type of technologies, communication technologies in general, that just really focus on optimizing battery life, and that really kind of like give a chance to new categories of product to emerge and be adopted globally. So why do battery dies? Like the real reason is that like your devices are doing a lot of things, right? So like running basic operations on like, these are for like a 2000 milliwatt hour batteries. That's like standard battery. You'd find like a lithium ion battery in a smartwatch. It's like approximately that size. If you were just to run like basic CPU processing on these, that could run for a while, like 6,500 hours. But if you start doing things a little bit more advanced, like BLE communication and Wi-Fi communication is still kind of fine, but as soon as you get into the GPS location services and cellular, like long-range communication, high frequency, then you're killing this battery pretty fast, which explains why most of your cell phone is really like the real estate is battery and screen size. So when we look at cellular, like I wanted to zoom in on the cellular use case and try to understand why cellular is killing batteries so much. If you start looking at the design of cellular networks in general and communication protocol over cellular technology, most of this is really optimized for cell phones. And that means you're in a very urban environment, very close to cell towers. You want to stream videos out of YouTube, and you're going to recharge your phone every night anyway, so we don't really have any reason to optimize for power these devices. What's really interesting is that leads to a bunch of design consequences, design decisions that make it very difficult to use cellular for other use cases than cell phones. One of these consequences, for example, is that we have this device that they are alive pretty much every second. Like your phone tells the network that it's alive every second and 28, basically. If it doesn't, the network is just going to forget about the phone and make sure that it doesn't get cluttered by devices that are not active on the network. All that consumes a lot of energy, right? Every second, my phone has to send some type of data to the closest cell tower just to say, hey, I'm alive. The other consequence of this is that you have you're not supposed to disconnect and reconnect from that network very often. So when you get off the plane and you turn off your airplane mode and your phone tries to connect to the closed cell tower, there is a whole set of negotiation that happens between your cell phone and that cell tower that basically crushes the battery, because you have a lot of data transfer that happens just to say, hey, here's who I am. Do you know who I am? Yes, I know who you are. Do you really know who I am, et cetera, et cetera. So when you try to basically move that thing to a wearable use case where you have either a watch or a random device like the one we built that has to communicate on a very sporadic period to the network, then cellular networks are really not adapted to this. Enters CAT-M1. So CAT-M1 is a new network that was kind of deployed by AT&T and Verizon starting 2 years ago. They have been rolling that out for a while. And what it does is that it creates two new functions to the LTE protocol. It's kind of a branch of the LTE roadmap, and it kind of adds some commands that you can use to optimize power consumption on this network. So what it does is that it uses DRX. DRX is something that was invented a while ago on the cell phone network. DRX is that thing that happens when you don't talk. If you don't come from a Middle Eastern family like me, when you're on a phone call, like, people don't talk over each other. And during this silence, your phone is actually gonna like shut down half of the circuitry of your cell phone. So every time you don't speak, your cell phone is gonna shut down a bunch of circuitry to save power. And every time you start speaking, it's gonna buffer that data and start sending it over. For you, it's transparent and you feel like there is a kind of bidirectional channel of communication open all the time, but really what's happening is that this channel is flipping really fast. So what these guys did is that they created extended pagination, like eDRX. Instead of using these to kind of like separate the data being sent one way or another during the conversation, what they allow you is use the same kind of like mechanism, but extend the duration in between these moments and set it up from the device perspective. So now all of a sudden you can have gaps of like 40, 45 minutes between transmission, and your device doesn't have to report to the cell tower every second. By doing that, your device is offline, so you cannot communicate with, it's like as if you were putting your phone in airplane mode very fast for 45 minutes and then coming back to the network and exchanging some data then. But for certain use cases, like let's say you have an IoT device that is something like a smart electric power meter or something like that, 45 minutes might be completely fine. And that was just not possible before with cellular networks. So they did this, and they implement something else called PSM. And PSM is kind of like the ability to put the device entirely to sleep, which is a super, super low power kind of state, and wake him up to like 400 days later. So you get use cases where you could have very sporadic information being sent every year, for example, by like devices like measuring the height of a river or something like that, that they would report once a month, and on a coin battery, all of a sudden you get something that can report for 5 years without being changed or recharged. So now real use cases. We apply that to dogs. For about 15 years, these type of devices existed. They were just really big, kind of full of battery devices that were supposed to report GPS location on dogs getting lost. We knew the use case was existing. We knew there were about like 10 million dogs getting lost in the US every year. And technology wasn't really there. Like the only way you could prevent that was put something like that on your dog and then recharge it every 2 days on average. And so what that thing has to do is actually pretty complex, right? Like the dog escape, the collar starts to acquire, like powers the GPS chip, try to get a location that's super power intensive. Because basically it's looking at the sky, trying to locate a bunch of satellites, trying to infer the position accurately enough, and then shutting down the whole thing, and then doing it again probably 2 minutes later because the dog moved, right? And then power the antenna to connect to the cellular network, do that whole thing that was super expensive in 3G or 4G, connect to the cellular network, send that data, receive acknowledgement of the data, go back to sleep, and then basically relay all that information. Like the servers would then relay all that information to whoever is reading the device. That thing would crush the battery in Like any kind of like battery that I showed before would be crushed in like 5 hours or something like that. So how we made it work? We kind of combine a bunch of things. We combine all the techniques that I described before around like saving power on the cellular networks. So whenever cellular network was necessary, we would actually leverage CAT-M1 to like save battery. But we also kind of combine other technology like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So whenever there are kind of like 3 use cases, right? Like either the dog is at home and is safe, or the dog is with an owner outside, or the dog actually escapes, right? And like there is only that last use case that requires cellular network. All the other we can solve in different ways. So for the first 2 use cases, what we're doing is that we're connecting in Bluetooth to either a beacon or to the cell phone of the user to relay all the traffic back to our servers. And that consumes like close to nothing. Like BLE is just has evolved to be very stable and like very low power. So that's working pretty well. And then during that time, like the modem is in PSM, meaning like it's down to sleep and like there is close to 0 power consumed by serial communication. And then if the dog escapes, then we start powering GPS, and then we use PSM to send that location on a regular basis. And then we can also modulate that, right? Like, so we had dogs who got lost for like 19 hours in the woods, and like we have no GPS signal. The collar will detect that, and it won't try to acquire the cellular signal, right? It'll just go to sleep, stay in PSM as long as it doesn't get like a new location. We can also use accelerometer that is in the collar and detect if the dog is moving, because if I had the location half an hour ago and the dog was a certain place and he didn't move since then, well, I really have no reason to keep like pulling GPS and cellular to do that. And basically by doing that, we've been able to launch in April, and we can reach as much as 3 months of battery life on one charge for dog. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. This is our current map. We have about like tens of thousands of dogs and hundreds of dogs found since then. So we've had a lot of fun. That's all I got. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Quick question from me before I open it up to the crowd. What was the impetus for starting? Why dogs?
Yeah, that was funny. So I got I got my dog 3 years ago, and I was working a lot, and I hired this dog walker that I found at the dog park. It was a super nice guy, seemed like it, and kind of like I had a camera at home, like a canary camera, and I kind of realized that the walks were getting shorter and shorter, and the playtime at home was like. So I just wanted to put a GPS on the dog, and I tried everything that was out there, and I had that terrible experience before, which was like, what is that thing that just never works? I need to recharge it every 2 days. I kind of why? And so I started putting a prototype together, looking into it, and then I realized that the limitations were really the technology, like the networks that were deployed at the time just couldn't support what I was trying to do. And CAT-M1 was coming out at the same time, so I was like, okay, I think we can do something with that.
That's great. Thank you very much. All right, I'll open up for questions from the audience. Who's got their first question? Okay.
Yeah, thank you for presentation. How is it different from tile? You know, like little device, tile, little device? Yeah.
Yeah, tile only does the Bluetooth thing. So Bluetooth range is like 50 meters. So if your dog goes further than the end of the done.
Oh, which is not true, because I have my tile device in my car, and I always can locate my car. I was given that device on one of the conferences. I completely forgot about that. And like after 2 years, I recovered that tile device and drop it in my car, so I can see where my car is, like pretty much.
Yeah, I think what they have something called like a mesh network or something like that they are trying. Like if you have enough people with tile in your area, they can actually use that to geolocate. But there is no GPS chip in the tile, like none.
Awesome. Other questions? Quick poll. How many people in this audience have a dog or want a dog? Raise your hand. I want a dog. I don't have one. Okay, awesome. So some of you must have a question about this incredible tech. One more question?
With that?
Hello? Is it a subscription model where you have to? Yep.
Yeah, you're paying like we're saying this color. Sorry, I didn't show the product. We're selling the collar for $149, and then there is a $99 yearly subscription for the service. Yeah, we just launched a small. So one of the challenges we had was like, there is only that much you can pack in this. So we try to make it as small. This is a medium, but we just launched a small model for small dogs.
Just a quick question about the data set that you're getting with this tool. Are you doing any learning on it? I'm just thinking about an owner that takes great care of their dog. Is there anything that you hit them with that says the likelihood that the dog is going to want to escape because they need to get out because they're, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. There is some super cool data we're getting with that for sure. I mean, listen, we have all the activity data, right? Like all the steps that the dogs are taking and all the location data pretty much all the time. When it's on Bluetooth, we sample every minute. And when it's on GPS, it depends, it varies to like, we kind of have that heuristic in the collar to decide how often we want to sample the location. The reality is that there is a huge, like tons of applications to that data that we're working on now. Like the first step is kind of like cool and utilitarian, don't lose your dog and find it in the woods. But there are like tons of applications we're working on now.
You got one in the back?
Sorry.
Well, there's time afterwards to follow up with other questions. We got one more question in the back.
Forgive me if you covered this earlier in your presentation. I only caught the very end. But what's the key difference between you guys and, say, like Whistle?
Yeah, Whistle. So Whistle used to be on 3G. That was one of the main difference was battery life overall. I think they just released like a CAT-M1 module, something like that. They got sold like 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, not huge difference. Besides, we think it's better.
Some other questions? Yep.
How do I get one? Actually, I need two. I have 2 dogs, and they usually are fine. But like last winter, for some reason, we have a weekend. We have a home upstate, and they just disappeared for 3 hours, and we were very panicked. Especially my kids were panicked, and then suddenly on one of the cameras that I have, on one of my Nest cameras, we saw them coming back very joyful. We don't know where they went, but they had a great time. So how do I get 2?
Sorry, what was it?
You said just how do you get one? Just on your website? How do you buy the device?
Oh, online, yeah.
What's the website? Tryfi.com?
Tryfi.com.
Tryfi.
Can you talk through the IP? Like, do you have unique IP in terms of like the satellite pinging with the accelerometer and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Thank you. A lot of people think that like, especially with hardware, like anyone can copy this, etc., right? And it's like because a board is a board in the end, right? The reality is that because like all the benefits from the CAT-M1 and all of these different networks are driven by how you drive the hardware, it's actually all software. Like most of the work we've done over the past 2 years is refining the firmware that's driving all of this chip and deciding what is a signal, like what is a signal that tells you a dog is actually escaping? Because I can tell you like GPS location accuracy is between 50 and 70 feet depending when you sample and if there is clear sky that day. And cellular network latency is different. And every dog's pattern of activity is different as well. So makes the difference between a dog escaping a backyard and a dog playing ball with the owner in the backyard is what's actually rich in that solution. And so like most of it is really software. Sorry, does that answer your question?
I guess follow up. Do you have any issued patents, or it's all in the software?
Sorry, yeah, no. So for that reason, like I'm not super obsessed about patents. I have no problem with anyone replicating the hardware or design. Like we have trademark on everything we're doing, but like when it comes to actual hardware design, I don't think that's very important.
We got time for maybe one more.
Is anyone buying these and attaching them to their children?
Children, cats, grandparents with dementia, add requests for birds. Yeah, it's tough because we get them in support after that. They're like, hey, it doesn't work for my... And we're like, yeah, it's not made for horses. Like, like because of all of that, like they don't realize that there is actually a lot of work in the heuristic of interpreting the behavior that drive the behavior of the product. So it's like, doesn't behave like a dog. Like,
awesome. Well, we have time afterwards for more questions, but Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.